We're still on the letter F in our acronym fall. We're in our discussion of the acronym FALL, F-A-L-L, framing, audio, lighting, and lenses. For framing, we've already discussed the 180-degree rule, which tells us where we can place our camera within one side of that circle, right? And the angles that we capture are definitely going to affect the framing. Framing being the thing that the camera sees, the image that comes through, what we see in the viewfinder, and the ultimate image that's produced when we hit that record button. So if angles or that 180-degree rule affects framing, for certain this next one is going to affect it, and that is the rule of thirds. I'm back to my good friend Blender here to talk about the rule of thirds. The screen that you see right now, this is looking through Blender's camera, and I've enabled the thirds grid. And so this is breaking up the frame, as you can see, or my view, into not quite equal parts of thirds, but it's breaking this view into thirds. So here I've got, if you go horizontally, I've got my top third row, my middle third row, my bottom third row, and if you're going horizontally, vertically, the right third, the middle third, and the left third. Okay? So what the rule of thirds says, it says that anything that in your framing that is supposed to be the focus of attention, you want to place it on a third. And what that's referring to is wherever these lines intersect, okay, you can see these 4 points. What the rule of thirds states is that you try to place your content of interest on one of those thirds, okay? And that's as plain and simple. Let me bring up an image here. I'm going to change the opacity. This is, hopefully you recognize this. This is the, let me do this here. Oops. This is a shot from the short film I was shooting with my niece, just because I can. And let me go ahead and bring the opacity down so you can see the grid a little easier. All right, that should be good right there. But this is basically the default of how I try to frame my content. And I'll show you a couple different things here, but and this is what's meant by using the third. You take the main part of your subject and you focus them on these thirds, okay? And in my viewfinder, in my camera, as I'm framing up my shot, the grid, I can have that grid displays. I can get that grid to display. So immediately when I'm framing up my shot before I hit record, I'm immediately thinking about this and how to line these things up. So here I've got my main character framed up alongside or along with this third, okay? Now what you're going to find when you're looking at other images, and perhaps even you're going to start noticing this as you start watching television and films and things like that, you're going to notice how much this rule of thirds is employed. But it's not an exact science, it's just a ballpark. Sometimes you'll see things are exactly on, and other times you'll see they're in the ballpark, and this is in the ballpark, okay? I have my character lined up along this right third, and in the direction that she's facing, I've created space, right? So if I was to flip this along the horizontal axis, you can see here she is along the left third, facing in the direction that she's facing. I create the most space, right? Flip that back, and the other thing notice is the cup is also on a third. So 2 points of interest, all right, that are important, and they're both lined up in the ballpark along the thirds, okay? And so when you use your thirds to line up two different subjects, such as this person and this cup here, that's also going to help you determine how far away your camera should be, because you move closer, you move further, or you zoom in or zoom out on your lens depending on how you're filming, so that you get your content lined up where you want it to be lined up. All right. So this is the rule of thirds in action. And generally speaking, when it comes to people, you face them in the direction where there's more room. Okay. So in other words, you put them on the third, facing in the direction of the image where there's more room. Okay. Now sometimes what you might do from an artistic standpoint is you may do something like this. Let's see, how do I go here like so. All right. Notice how I've placed her for the moment on this third, shortening up the distance in the direction she's facing. As an artistic reason, a director might choose to have the shot framed in this way because they're showing that the person is faced with something that that they're having a hard time overcoming. So, for example, later on in our sessions, we're going to start shooting our own short film called Wrong Number. And in that short film, our main character is going to be reading something on a piece of paper. Well, it could be, and this won't be in our film that we do together, but it could be in a different story that character, maybe she's not playing a game, but she's reading a paper, and it's a foreclosure notice, and her house is about to be foreclosed upon. The director might make a decision to frame the shot in this way to show that the character's up against the wall, so to speak. They've got nothing to look forward to. It's a desperate situation. I don't know if the viewer would pick up on something like that, but it's just a reason or an example of an artistic reason why you may choose to do it this way, to frame your character on the short third rather than on the long third here, as is in this case. But generally speaking, you'll see characters framed on the long third, and long third being there's a lot of space in the image facing the direction that they're facing. This is also a great way to frame up dialogue. Suppose you're doing it over shoulder. Suppose a person is here over the shoulder looking towards this direction. You'd frame one conversationalist on the left third and the other on the right third. Okay. Let me bring up another image. This isn't anything we're working on, but this will be a good example. Let me also just dial down this opacity a bit. This is a picture I took on my iPhone. Last year we were out in California for my youngest boy's birthday, and my wife and two boys were walking along the beach. My daughter wasn't with us. She's living in New Zealand, but we were here on the beach at sunset, and I was just kind of trying to eyeball it in the framing. I didn't have a grid to look at, so I was trying to eyeball. Now notice I get the horizon line along the top third here. So you're going to see a lot of horizontal framing of images be lining up horizon lines, and that's a great way to do it. I could just as easily have done, let me try this here. There we go. So you can see how I moved that horizon line to the bottom third. Bring the opacity down even more so you can see that. So there's the line, and as I bring up the image, you can see it's along the bottom third. Now that would create a lot of sky space over here, but that's just another example of how you might use the horizontal thirds and frame up your horizon based along the top third or the bottom third. So one thing I'll challenge you to do, and I think you'll be able to learn so much from doing this, is just go into your browser and do an internet search for the rule of thirds, and then look at all the images that come up and just study them and see how the rule of thirds has been employed. Okay, so we've talked about the rule of thirds. We've talked about the 180-degree rule. Together, both of these things affect what the camera sees and what ends up as a part of our final image. Again, just like the 180-degree rule, I want to suggest that the rule of thirds be treated by you, especially if you're brand new at this. I want to suggest that the rule of thirds be treated as a rule rather than a guideline. It really is just a guideline, but what you want to do when you're starting out especially is you want to get to the point where you're thinking that rule of thirds. Every time you're turning on your camera and aiming it at a subject, you're thinking about where in the framing of that view you're going to put your subject, right? And so the rule of thirds is a rule that's going to set you free. If you're ever in a spot where you're like, I don't know where I'm going to put my subject, well, just think of those intersections, right? Those thirds, remember the four intersections, you place your focal point on one of those thirds. And by doing that, you adhere to defined standards of framing. And so that, again, that rule of thirds will set you free. What you don't want to do, and when we say rules and guidelines and things like that, of course, all these things can be broken, okay? But what you don't want to do is you don't want to ever break these rules by accident. You want to break them on purpose. And what I mean by that is there's been times I've broken the rule of thirds as I've panned my camera and set up my shot because I wanted a certain angle, but I could only go so far perhaps because I'm trying to keep lights or I'm trying to keep a microphone out of the shot, okay? So I was aware of the rule of thirds, but I deliberately broke it because I was trying to avoid some other situation that would have been even worse. Okay, and that's how you break those rules. You break them when it makes sense to break them. Okay, but you don't want to break them because it was something that you did by accident because you didn't understand the rule. So the 180-degree rule, the rule of thirds, get those things down, make them a part of every day you shoot, okay? Get to the point where you just think about them without even having to think about them. You just start operating by those rules and those guidelines. And then once you've got that down, you'll find yourself breaking them for creative reasons or breaking them for technical reasons. Like I said, keeping some element out of the shot, right? But when that happens, it'll be deliberate because you've chosen as the director to do so.